To start off, I'm a 26-year-old female. The story happened to me almost 15 years ago, but it will forever haunt me. Back then, social media was just beginning. Even though my parents were against it, I had secretly made a MySpace account and became obsessed, as most teenagers are with social media nowadays. However, there was still no such thing as catfish, so children weren't aware of the dangers of social media. With that being said, I had over 1,000 friends, some of which I didn't know. Keep this part in mind as the story continues. Being the baby in the family, I never got dibs on using the computer at home, so I would walk to the local library just about every day to log on to MySpace. The library was about a 4-minute walk from my house, and I always felt safe, even without having a cell phone with me. On this particular day, I'd followed the same routine and walked to the library after school. That day, for some reason, my mom had given me her flip phone to call for a ride home if I didn't feel like walking once it got dark. I arrived at the library and I sat behind the computer and began scrolling away. I noticed a familiar face, another girl who lived in the neighborhood, and she came down and sat next to me. Because we were supposed to be quiet while in the library, we chatted through the messenger on MySpace instead. We sat together for about an hour when she had sent me a chat and said, "Do you see that man over there?" As I looked up, I noticed a man who was in his 40s to 50s, and he was peeking through the bookshelves at us. He had on a baseball cap, so I was unable to get a great look at his face, but I could clearly see his dark eyes staring straight at me. I chatted her back, and I told her I had noticed, and I was creeped out. As time passed though, the man would take breaks by walking to a different book aisle, but he would always end up back behind the bookshelf staring at me. I felt myself becoming more and more creeped out, but like a silly teenager, MySpace seemed more important at the time than getting out of this crazy situation. My friend who was sitting next to me chatted me one last time, telling me she had to go home now. A pit in my stomach formed as I watched her log off her account and grab her bag to leave. As she then walked away, I noticed the man coming closer to me. With almost no hesitation, he sat right next to me and began using the computer. I now felt an overwhelming feeling of danger, but I tried to stare directly at my screen so he wouldn't notice how scared I was. After a few moments, I glanced at his computer screen, and what I saw made all the hairs on my neck stand up. My own private MySpace pictures. Yes, private. I knew that in order to view those pictures, you had to be my friend on MySpace. However, I didn't even know this man. My mind began to race, as I couldn't figure out how this was possibly happening. I had enough. I took out my mom's cell phone and began dialing. As I then said, "Mom, I really need a ride right now." The man became aware that I had saw his screen, and he then shut off his computer, put his head in his hands as if he was embarrassed and he was hiding his face. I got up and hid in another corner of the library until my mother arrived. When she came up the stairs, I was hysterical, and I tried my best to explain the situation to her. She walked over and took a good look at the man, almost to let him know that he had not gotten away with this one. When I later got home, we informed my dad, and he went back to the library to watch the man, as we were really concerned that he was stalking me. My dad discreetly followed him home so we had his address if anything else happened. To this day, I'm convinced that he was indeed a catfish who I had naively accepted, and that he must have been following me and knew my routine. I'm beyond thankful that I had my mom's cell phone, and that I was smart enough not to walk home alone. If I had, I really don't think I'd be here today. Do not accept people you don't know as followers. The extra follower really isn't worth it.
Last year, I went to the KFC drive-thru one night. I was driving home after doing some shopping, and I don't remember the exact time, but it was maybe like 9 p.m. or so. I was craving a chicken sandwich from KFC, so when I saw one close to the stores I had been at, I stopped at it. I went in the drive-thru to order faster, but when I arrived at the menu and rolled my window down, I didn't hear anything at the other end. I waited for about a minute and looked around. The lights were still on, so it looked like they might still be open. However, nobody was saying anything. I asked if anybody was there, but still didn't get a response. I noticed headlights approaching behind me and saw a larger-looking truck pulling into the drive-thru behind me. I decided to look online to see if they were actually open or not. I took out my phone, and for a minute I was looking to find the KFC when I heard the truck behind me honk. I looked and couldn't see who was in the truck due to the bright headlights, but I figured the guy wanted me to hurry up. As I was on my phone, I heard a door open and shut behind me. The next thing I knew, I saw a man approaching my driver's window. I rolled it down, and the guy was angry right away. He had longer hair and a beard, and was yelling at me to hurry up and said I was wasting his time. I told the man that they were closed, and nobody had answered the intercom. The man didn't seem to understand me though, and kept going on about how I was wasting everybody's time and how mad he was. He began yelling at me in a threatening way, and it seemed as though he was likely drunk or high or on some sort of drugs. He really wasn't making a whole lot of sense, and I decided to just tell the man that I was sorry and that I was going to leave. I didn't know what he was capable of, and the man then cursed at me and started returning to his truck. I was happy he was gone, and I began to drive away. I figured he could find out for himself that the place was closed and nobody would answer him. But when I drove off, he began following me. He was honking and revving his engine as he drove extremely close to my car. I was concerned because if the man was on drugs, he certainly shouldn't be operating a vehicle. He also was driving a big truck that was much larger than my little car. I drove out onto the road and he followed. I was hoping he would pass me, and a short time after we got past the businesses to a more rural area, he did begin to pass me. But when the man's truck got about even with my car, I saw him roll down his window and start yelling at me again. He then veered his truck towards my car and was starting to run me off the road. I slammed on my brakes and stopped, and the truck kept going and ended up crashing into the ditch. I stopped there on the side of the road and saw the man exit the vehicle and began running towards mine. I sped away after that, and I called the police and reported the whole incident. Looking back, I'm glad the man went into the ditch because he could have caused a serious accident or got somebody hurt. I'm not sure what his problem was or why he was acting that way.
This happened during a cold night in 2017. It was probably about 10 p.m. or so. I was on my way home and stopped at a Burger King that was maybe 5 minutes away. When I got there, I parked and went inside to order. It wasn't very busy at all. I was inside the restaurant for maybe 5 minutes, give or take. Then I left to go back to my car. When I was leaving, that's when I remember seeing a guy standing outside for the first time. There was a man standing just outside next to the building, but maybe 15 feet down from me. He was kind of just standing there, and as I walked to my car, I could tell he was starting to walk after me. I got to my vehicle and entered it, but then saw in my mirror the man was now only a few feet away from my car and walking closer. He then came over to my driver's window. I rolled it down just a little bit and asked if I could help him. The man said yes and told me that he was freezing. It was winter time and it was really cold out. The man was wearing a jacket, but I guess he was still cold. If you were outside for long enough, no matter if you had a jacket on or not, you would probably get cold. The man asked me if he could sit in my car to warm up, just for a couple of minutes. My answer was no, pretty quickly. I didn't even really have to think about it at all. I mean, who would let a random stranger sit in their car just to warm up? I was trying to get home to eat, and I didn't want to wait around. Plus, I didn't know who this guy was, where he was from, or where he was going. I also realized looking back that if the man did just want to warm up so bad, why didn't he just go inside the Burger King instead of standing outside? After I told the man no, he tried to persuade me. I rolled up my driver's window all the way as he was still talking. Then, I started backing out of my parking space. The parking lot only had 3 other cars in it scattered around. They were a ways away, and I was parked across from the restaurant near a grassy area with a long line of bushes. As I was backing up, the man hit my driver's window with his fist. Then, I started to drive forward to leave, and the guy kicked my car. I saw 2 other men emerge from the bushes a short distance from where I had parked. Those 2 men ran at my car, and one of them reached it. All he was able to really do, though, is just hit my car, By then, I was driving faster. I remember pulling out of the parking lot and seeing 3 men running after me. They wouldn't be able to catch me on foot though. I kept driving and soon realized that I should call the police, which I did. I told them about the guys, but I never heard anything back, meaning they probably got out of there after I left. I made it home okay, and I also never saw the guys again after that. My car didn't really have any damage to it, which I was also happy to see. I didn't go to that particular Burger King again for a while though. To this day, I'm very certain that the man was just trying to get me to let him inside my car. Then the other 2 men would have come out of the bushes and done who knows what. I really hope they didn't do that to anybody else. Always be aware of your surroundings, especially at night.
My mother was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base around the late 2010s, and being a military child at the age of 12, my life had reset once again. I didn't have friends again, and I had to learn an entire new neighborhood. I didn't really have anything that made me ecstatic. That is, except for the Pokemon League held on base. It was ran by a few people who had earned their judge cards from Nintendo, and they held tournaments and just open game nights. It was really fun picking up the card game, playing in the video game. They even had a small gym and Elite Four system. I made a lot of friends, and one of them who was the judges, who I am thankful to still to this day, because if it wasn't for him, I might not be here right now. The judge in question will refer to as Professor Getsu for the sake of anonymity, and he was a really nice guy. He was the youngest of the 3, and he wore a white professor's getup. He looked maybe on the edge of his teens, early 20s with dark hair and glasses, and he had a skinny frame. He was extremely helpful to newcomers, sort of like the big brother we could all look up to, and also strive to beat in our children's cars and video games, even though his game name of Getsu was a bit nerdy, even for me. He was always one of the last people to leave, helping to clean up, and he supposedly lived nearby. The last thing is important for what's about to happen. It was a bit of a colder night when the event ended. I was sitting outside in the parking lot scrolling through memes that my friend had texted me, all while I was waiting for my parents to arrive to pick me up. I was just kinda zoning out as the time had clicked by, when I heard someone nearby. "Hey girlie, you play Pokemon?" I looked up at some really big dude, kinda chubby looking. I saw him every now and then in the events, and he didn't really stand out that much. I gave a small nod, then saying, "Yeah, I do," as he then gives this wide smile, like creepy wide. He starts walking forward, and I'm then hit with this nasty stench, like really bad body odor. I blinked as I bit, as I then see he's walking from a black sedan, and its back door is wide open. "I got this really cool card collection. Come here, let me show you." Now, my parents have always taught me about stranger danger, but my kid brain thought, hey, he went to the events and I saw him there, so this should be fine. At least, so I thought. That is until he grabbed me by my wrist and started to actually drag me to the sedan. To say that I immediately started screaming is an understatement. Stinky didn't care though. He was still dragging me, saying, "Shut up, you're gonna have fun," and throwing out things about trading cards, like someone listening would think that he was dealing with a whiny kid. I honestly thought that I was going to be taken, and that I would never see my mom and dad ever again, that I would end up on the back of a milk carton and never be seen again. Silly, I know, but I was rather sheltered about dying in death at that time. Thankfully for me, however, Professor Getsu had walked out at that very moment, presumably on his way to walk home. All I know is I then heard the sound of fabric hitting the dude's face, as Professor had swung his professor coat right into the dude's face. I feel his hand go to where the dude's grabbing my arm, and I then see his hand grab Stinky's pinky finger, and then yank back, and hard. Stinky let go, and yowled like an animal, as the professor pushed me back behind him, as he then yanked the coat off the guy. He then kicked at the back of the dude's knees as he caused him to buckle, as the professor grabbed his wrist and pulled back on them. Stinky groaned in even more pain than before as the professor looked at him with just a cold look in his eyes. The big brother figure was gone and something else was in its place, and I think I was a bit scared of it. The professor's tone of voice when he spoke didn't help either. It was like icy daggers lingered with his words against Stinky. If I see you back here or doing this shit to my charges, this will pale in comparison to what the Japanese prisons will do to you. Stinky would scramble away and then get into his car, peeling away out of the parking lot. The professor still glaring at him until he was out of sight. He would then guide me inside the venue, buy me some fish and chips, and sit down with me until my parents arrived. The cold persona he had when he kicked that dude was gone. It was right back to being the big brother that I knew. To be frank, that really frightened me. I didn't quite understand why the teenager was so aggro. I only later learned that Professor Getsu was also a black belt who had apparently taught kids how to defend themselves with his mother at the local activity center. I suspected that he had something of a protective persona or something in his own life that had led him to act in such a way. He explained the situation to my folks when they arrived. I wasn't allowed to go to the events and league as much as I was used to, but I still did from time to time. Professor Getsu was still his normal self at the events and always helping people, but he would stop coming to the events a year afterwards, his license having expired and his father moving out of the country soon. Reaching about the same age as he was, and with a little sibling on my own, I really sympathized with how for a brief moment, he became something terrifying just to make sure I was safe. Oh, and as for Stinky, he never showed up to the events again. He was either banned, or he was just really scared of Professor Getsu. I really wish the professor a good life, and I hope he's doing well to this day. As for Stinky, I really hope we never see each other again.
This happened about a year ago. I went to a Burger King with my friend Emily. It was probably about 8 p.m. and we sat down in a booth to eat. Emily and I were just chatting and joking around, having a good time like always. We had been there for maybe 20 minutes when a man who was a Burger King employee walked over to us. He was sort of average height, had a little bit large build, and had dark hair. Immediately, I was wondering what he wanted. Burger King is not the type of restaurant where you have a waiter. It's not even the kind of restaurant where people usually come over and ask how the food is or anything like that. It's just a fast food place. He said hi, looking at both me and Emily. We said hi to him, and then there was an awkward silence. He started having like a casual conversation with us. I remember he said something like, "How are you guys doing?" or "What are you guys doing?" We were both confused and just told him that we were eating and talking to each other. He kept hanging around though. He was standing right next to the table. That's when Emily asked what the guy wanted. He acted all insulted and was like, "What did I do?" I thought he might be joking, and that's when the guy helped himself to a seat. He scooted in and sat right next to me on the bench of the booth. We sort of laughed it off, but I know I was secretly wanting him to leave, and I thought it was really uncomfortable. I'm sure Emily felt the same way too. Then, he asked us if we could go order him some food. That's when he started getting rude. We asked him to leave, and he just kept sitting there, and we argued with him for a while. It wasn't like a big scene or anything, and we weren't shouting, but we were going back and forth. Finally, he angrily got up and left us at the table. We watched him walk away and out the door. He'd been talking to us for a total of almost 10 minutes. Emily and I were really annoyed by this. We decided to go up and complain to let them know that one of the employees had been harassing us. When we walked up there was a woman behind the counter. I said to her that there was an employee that had been really rude to us. The woman at the register looked annoyed. She said, "Yeah, and he was fired earlier." She went on to say that he had been fired just earlier that night when she had thought that he left. The area we were sitting in was not visible to the front counter. She apologized and gave us a gift card for the trouble. We were also offered free ice cream. We accepted the offer and went back to sit down in the booth. We were there for maybe 10 more minutes, and then we left. After we got outside, we started walking to my car. I had drove from my house, which was really close by. When we were walking to my car, we saw the same employee step out of one of the cars that was parked in the parking lot. He started approaching us. Without giving it a second thought, Emily and I both sprinted for my car. As we did, he started running towards us. We got to my car as quickly as possible and got inside and locked the doors. It was probably the fastest amount of time that we possibly could have done it in. He reached the car just moments later. He tried opening Emily's door on the side. It was locked though. I backed away and left the parking lot. I was afraid that the guy would follow us home, but thankfully he didn't. This was definitely my scariest experience at a Burger King. I'm not sure why the guy was fired from Burger King, but he clearly had some problems. What his intentions were, I don't know, but hopefully Emily and I don't see him again.
I was 15 years old at the time. I had two friends named Chris and Nicole. On one cold February night, a Saturday, we were really bored out of our minds at Chris's house, so we wanted to do something fun. Chris had told us that he had black and red spray paint in his closet. Now, I live in a relatively busy suburban city, and his house was in the not-so-nice part of town. So there's this big hill that his house sits upon, and down the hill are train tracks. The train tracks are where the kids go to smoke, drink, and graffiti things. I had sandals on, and there was no way I was going to walk through the dirt and wet grass to get down there in open-toed shoes. So Chris gave me a pair of Converse that were 2 sizes too big, but of course I wasn't complaining. It's better than nothing, right? So we stepped out of the window trying to make as little noise as possible because Chris's mom was asleep, and the front door was also really loud. It was around 10 p.m. at this point. We hopped down from the balcony onto his backyard patio. The jump down honestly wasn't too bad. Out of all the friends I hang out with, I get really bad anxiety. I wasn't usually into this type of stuff, but I could tell Chris and Nicole really wanted to go use the spray paint on the cement wall that were next to the train tracks. So I guess I just went along with it because I didn't want to be a burden on their fun. Looking back though, I really wish I would have just stayed home. So we get off this patio and we start the walk down the muddy hill to the rocks and train tracks. In the dark, it was insanely intimidating. We had no source of light at all. Their phones were dead, and mine was just about to die. I was saving the battery for some pictures of the graffiti that we had sprayed to show our other friend Sam, who had different plans that night. It was also a new moon, so there was no light coming from the sky. We finally got down to the tracks and rocks. Even though it was only about a 5-minute max walk, it felt like forever. Walking on the rocks at night in shoes that were way too big for me was really difficult. We also had this English teacher that we all hated. His name was Mr. Kuntz. The other kids in our class always called him Mr. Kuntz, because that's how his name was actually spelled. So we had sprayed his name in red and a bunch of 6s in a row. Looking back, this part still legitimately gives me nightmares, I swear. Once we were about to turn and walk across the rocks and up the hill to Chris's house, all of a sudden, a super bright light shined in our faces. I can't even explain the fear and confusion that I actually felt in that moment. I was way too afraid to turn and look at my friends to see the looks on their faces. I was standing in between the two of them. Shit, I thought. Was it a cop? No, that's stupid. I mean, if it was a cop, he would have made his presence known. I was trying to calm myself down. Since the flashlight was so bright and the sky was so dark, we couldn't see anything behind it, let alone who was even shining it. To my horror, the flashlight that was aimed at us turned around quickly with force, then revealing the face of a grown man. He was probably around 30 years old, 6 feet tall, and he was wearing a hood over his head. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode right out of my chest. Here we are, 3 innocent freshmen face to face with a grown man who clearly had bad intentions with us. I hadn't glanced at my friends yet to see their reactions, but I'm quite sure they were just as afraid as I was. I had no clue where this was about to go or what was about to happen. We were all small 15-year-old kids, so obviously this man could do whatever he wanted to us. The only weapon we had on us was one of the spray paint bottles that Chris was holding at the time. I was just praying he was on the same page as me. Spray paint the man's face if he lunges at us. The man finally broke the silence, then sang in a low, raspy voice.
Hey, are you kids doing drugs down here?
I was frozen still, so I finally looked to my right and then locked eyes with Nicole. I looked back at the man and I nervously shook my head no. He chuckled a bit, then sang,
Oh, well, do you kids want some drugs?
Yeah, hell no. This man was definitely dangerous. I had no idea when it was time to make a run for Chris's house, but this man was standing right in front of us, meaning that he was blocking the way that we would need to walk back to get to the house. Not a single one of us answered the man. I haven't been so scared in my whole life. So many different questions were going through my head. Does he have a weapon? A knife? A gun? All of us were so helpless. There also weren't many houses around, so who the hell knows if our screams could even be heard if we were to do so. The man started to slowly inch his way toward us, stopping when he was about a car's length away from us. I had no fucking idea how this situation was going to end, but I was pretty damn sure I was about to die. There was absolutely nothing stopping this man from kidnapping and murdering us. He took one more step towards us, slowly moving his hand to his back pocket. I didn't give a fuck anymore, and that was enough for me to break down screaming, "Run! Let's get the fuck out of here!" Chris ran left around the man, and Nicole and I ran around on his right side. I was stumbling all over the place, running on the small rocks spread all over the ground surrounding the tracks. I thought that the sound of all of our shoes hitting the rocks would conceal the sound of the man following us, so I had no idea if we were being chased or not. We were all in pretty good shape, so we ran fast. To my horror, I shot a single glance from behind me, only to see the man charging for us as we ran, with his flashlight shining in my damn eyes, only becoming closer. I didn't care how much noise I made. The three of us did our best to stay running next to each other, just to make sure one of us didn't get left behind. We had to think fast. Once we got far enough down the train tracks to see the hill leading up to Chris's house, I could just sense the man gaining on us. I was fearing for the worst that at any second, he could just grab one of us and we'd be done for. We came to the bottom of the hill leading up to his house and sprinted up on it, not looking back. Normally I would be falling all over the place with how muddy it was, but my adrenaline wouldn't let me fall. We realized that we had forgot to leave the front door unlocked for us to come back inside. So we had to knock on the door until his mom opened up. She was absolutely shocked to see us so out of breath. But earlier she had insisted we weren't supposed to leave the house, so she wasn't too happy. At that point though, we just didn't give a fuck about anything. She asked what the hell we were up to, why we were outside at night, why we were so out of breath, and why the hell were we holding spray paint cans? We didn't know what to say. We couldn't play it off as going to the store to grab snacks, since there's no snack shop around his house. So yeah, we came clean. We told her how we were graffitiing because we were bored. She just told us that we were dumb and to not do it again. She also confiscated all the spray paint cans and told us to go to bed. We were exhausted. The next morning when we woke up, we all just discussed everything that happened. Every time I think of this night, I always cringe so hard. My life and their lives could have easily ended that night. This night took me weeks to get over, and it's been 2 years ever since. Now it's just an interesting story to tell my friends.
I worked at a Burger King up until a few months ago. I was a manager at a location in the US, and I worked there for a total of almost a year. For my entire time working there, we were always understaffed. One night, I was working until close, which was 10 p.m. We were short that night, and I was kept really busy. We had lots of customers until about 7 or 8, then things quieted down. By the time it was 9:30, there were just 3 of us working. It was me, Spencer, and Michelle. We didn't get any customers during the last half hour. I remember that Michelle and Spencer were in the back. I was at the register, and I saw a car entering the parking lot. We closed in like 2 minutes, and I had a bad feeling. It's always frustrating when people come in right before close. If they were going to come here right before close, I was hoping they would at least do so in the drive-thru. The vehicle was an SUV. They parked it on the other side of the parking lot, kind of far away, instead of right by the door. Nobody got out of it immediately, though. Instead, the vehicle remained parked there. Soon, it became 10 p.m. I went over to lock the doors, as we were now closed. As I was approaching the doors, though, I saw several people start to get out of the vehicle. They were all men, and it looked to be 4 of them. The strange thing was that they all had backpacks on. I then realized that the men were all wearing masks as well. This was bad news. I hurried to finish locking the doors as fast as I could. Luckily, I was able to do so with about 10 seconds to spare. Then I moved away from the doors. The men all got to the doors and tried opening them, and when they couldn't get in, they started knocking on it. I started to hear one of the men speak, saying, "Excuse me, and could you please let us in?" I went to the back to let Spencer and Michelle know what was going on, so they wouldn't leave right now. There was still loud noises coming from the door of the men pounding on it. The pounding was getting louder. Then I returned to the front counter area, and I saw one of the men was at another window. Soon I started hearing knocking from all directions. There was a man banging on the front door, 2 others banging on different side windows, and one man was even banging on the drive-thru window. They kept pounding on them, and Spencer and Michelle came out to see who the guys were. I advised us not to go near any of the windows, and we decided to hide in the bathrooms for safety. We could still hear the loud banging as we were in there. We called the police and feared that the men might try to break in. About 2 minutes later, our fears came true. We heard breaking glass. We couldn't tell what direction it was coming from, though. Luckily, the bathroom that we were in had a locking door on it. Shortly after the sounds of breaking glass, we heard shouting coming from inside from men. I really don't remember what they said, and we were all really scared. I think that the men wanted to know where we were. None of us bothered to say anything back to them, though. I thought about yelling to them that I had called the police to try to get them to leave. I didn't, though. The men were inside, and we could hear their voices and them moving around for several minutes. All of us were huddled in the back corner of the bathroom. At one point, we heard one of the men walk close to the door. He then tried opening it. After it wouldn't open, he banged on it a couple of times, but then walked away. The men remained inside until finally we could hear sirens in the distance. That's when we heard the men shouting once again, and then things got quiet. I was assuming that meant because they left, but we were not going to take any chances and leave the bathroom early. We stayed in there until we heard voices saying police. When the 3 of us emerged, it looked like the restaurant had been turned upside down. Things were really messed up, and we could see the broken glass from the window. The men had left, but we were told that police were currently in pursuit of their car. They ended up catching them a short time later. The restaurant was closed until it could be repaired. Michelle said afterwards that she had seen several men walk inside of the restaurant earlier that night when we were really busy. She said that the men just sat down in the corner and never ordered anything. We didn't know for sure because those men didn't have masks on like the others did, but it seems like they could have been the same ones. I hadn't noticed because of how busy we were. I'm just glad all of us were okay.
I just recently went to KFC again the other day. I hadn't been there for a few years, and after going back, it reminded me of one of the scariest moments I had as a kid. I'm an adult now, and this took place probably about 20 years ago. I was maybe like 7 or 8, and my family would occasionally get KFC for dinner. It was one of my favorite things that we would get, and I always looked forward to it. Usually, my dad would go and pick it up from the restaurant and bring it home, and then we'd have it in our dining room. One night, I decided to go with my dad for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but it was a Saturday night, and it must have been either the fall or the spring, because I remember that it was sort of cold out, and it was already almost dark at about 6:30 p.m. We went inside, and my dad got in line to order. There was like one person ahead of us who was currently ordering, and as I waited, I began to kind of wander off around the restaurant. I remember that nobody else was sitting down and eating throughout the entire place. I got bored easy and was kind of in my own world, just walking around, looking at what I saw. I noticed that the person who had been ordering in front of my dad left, and my dad was now up to order. I was just looking around the place, and was near the back corner where there was another door. I was looking out the window when I heard the main door in front of the KFC open. I saw a man walk inside, and he went up to my dad as if he was starting to talk to him. Then, the back door that was near me opened. I saw a grown woman walk in. She sort of looked around, and then at me and smiled. She then extended her hand to me to shake it and said hi. I was sort of confused by this, but I shook her hand and then said hi back to her. But in shaking my hand, she didn't let go. She grabbed my wrist and started walking backwards to the door, only about 5 feet away. I was surprised by this, and before I knew it, we were outside. I didn't say anything and was just really confused at first. I remember the woman said something like she just wanted to show me something really quick. She led me right around the corner of the building to a van. It looked older and beat up, and the door was already open. She then put her other arm around me and kind of lifted me into the van without telling me to go inside or anything. At the same time, I saw a man come jogging from the other side of the building. When he got closer, I recognized him to be the same man that had started talking to my dad. He helped the woman get me inside the van, and they slammed the door shut. The man then sprinted around to the driver's door. Around the same time, though, I started to see another guy running around the corner of the building where we were. It was my dad. He was sprinting towards us, and I heard the woman who was in the back seat next to me, still holding onto my wrist, start to scream. She was yelling "Go" to the man, but the man driving then turned and said, "No, let him out." My dad reached the van and stood in front of it. I could hear him yelling. The woman ended up opening my door and then shoving me outside. My dad came around and grabbed me as they sped away. I remember my dad pointing out that the van didn't have any license plates on it when they drove off. We then went back inside after that, and my dad called the police and then began yelling at the people working at KFC. Obviously, it wasn't their fault, but he was just angry. The whole time, I didn't really know what to do. I just never expected anything like that to happen. After the police arrived at the KFC, I talked to a few officers and told them everything that happened, including describing the man and woman and their vehicle. Eventually, I was able to go home. We didn't go to that particular KFC for a long time after that. I work at KFC. I've been working with the company for about a year now, and this has got to be the scariest thing that's ever happened while working there, let alone my entire lifetime. I was working the late shift on a Thursday night. It was about 9 p.m. I'd been helping my manager on drive-thru with packing orders as we were getting a little bit of a rush in the drive-thru. There hadn't been anybody in the lobby for a while, and no one had come inside for the last hour. As I had finished making a famous bowl and passed it along to my manager to give to the drive-thru cashier, I heard the door to the restaurant open, and it made the noise that it always did when someone was coming in. I walked over to the front counter to greet whoever was there, but I saw no one at first. I turned around and went for a couple of seconds when suddenly I heard a voice call out to me. There was a girl now standing there who hadn't been there a few seconds before, and I had only turned my back for a very short time. I actually thought the girl was very pretty. She was my type and everything. I asked how I could help her, and she ordered a 2-piece with mac and cheese and a drink. She told me that she found me pretty cute, which I was actually kind of taken aback by it. She even told me that I looked good in the red uniform shirt. I laughed while blushing, but I couldn't directly say that I thought she was beautiful, as I had to remain professional. I went to go pack her order, and when I was done packing, I brought it to the front counter and called out to her to tell her her order was ready. I waited for a minute and got no response. I called out to her again, but still nothing. I thought maybe she went to go sit at a booth that was a little far back from the kitchen, but when I went there, however, she was nowhere to be seen. I was very confused, but I thought maybe she had just gone to the bathroom or something, so I went back to doing my work. Eventually, about an hour passed. It was time to lock the door to the lobby. I did, and then realized the girl who had walked in there. I looked back at the table, and the food was just sitting in the same place I had left it. I couldn't believe it. I went to knock on the girl's bathroom, as maybe something bad had happened to her, and I was quite worried. Eventually, after a few knocks and calling out a few times, I had gotten no response. I decided to open the door, and when I did, it clearly looked like nobody had been in there the entire time. I then attempted the men's restroom, which she could have gone in as well, but I got the same results. There was absolutely no one in there. I was in complete shock. How was this possible? The pack line wasn't too far from the front counter, and I could hear the entire time someone had come in there. From the time that the girl had come in there to now, I hadn't heard the door open or close once, and no customers had come in after that. I was very creeped out. I didn't know how she could have left, but I had about 2 hours of my shift left. I didn't tell my manager or anyone else what had happened in fear of getting accused of lying. I cleaned the entire lobby, cleaned the front counter area, and whatever other small tasks I had to do before leaving. I usually walk to and from the KFC, as I don't live very far, and it's about a 20-minute walk. I said goodbye to my coworkers for the night and began walking home. About 10 minutes into my walk, I had gotten this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I turned back, and my jaw dropped. Standing about 500 feet down the road was the same girl that had been in the KFC. I backed up and turned my head for a second, but when I looked back, she was gone, like she vanished into thin air. I was so scared that I ran the rest of the way home. Once I got to my door, I unlocked it as quick as I could and rushed inside. This was by far the scariest thing that ever happened to me working at KFC and in my life in general. This was only about 3 weeks ago, so it's still very fresh in my mind. I told one of my managers what had happened, and when I described what the girl looks like, tears rolled down her face and she was in complete shock. She said it sounded like I was describing Kaylee, an employee that I had heard of before. She had passed away a few months before I started working there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing at the same time, and it made me pretty emotional.